I came that they might have life and have it more abundantly. Dear brothers and sisters in Christ, welcome to this fourth Sunday of Easter, this Good Shepherd Sunday. In our gospel, from the Gospel of John today, we hear Jesus as the Good Shepherd, and his sheep hear his voice and recognize his voice. In this time, we're seeking to allow Christ to be our shepherd, to be led by him, directed by him, so that we might have life abundantly. In these days, think about how often we're called to grow. Oftentimes, it's pretty easy for children to understand they are still called to grow because their body's still growing, they're still gaining height, they're in school still learning. But even when you're an adult, you're still called to grow. Even when you had children, you're still called to grow. Even when you're older and have grandchildren, you're still called to grow. We're still called to grow until we reach the finish line, enter the joys of God's heavenly kingdom. Church, we believe there's purgatory, that state of purification that one may enter into after they pass from this life before they enter the heavenly kingdom. There's that purification that's going on. There's growth occurring. So we want to make sure we're not foolish in thinking that I'm done growing or I know everything I need to know. No, each day we're called to grow. I was hearing a story the other day about a woman when she was a child in middle school. Her family wasn't rich, but her mom brought her some shoes to be used for track. And she received the shoes, and she told her mom, "Mom, these shoes are too big. These are size 9. I'm only a size 5. And the mom replied saying, "I know. I did that on purpose because you're going to grow into them." And thinking about that, there's a beautiful lesson right there, to grow into them. Now, that child tried to use those shoes at school at track, and when she started a race, she started to run, she tripped because the shoes would not work properly for her. But later on, as she got older, those shoes would fit. They would run well. And sometimes we try to jump ahead of things. We want to do things right away. We may be impatient. We may say, "Oh, I'm fully grown," or "I'm where I need to be. I have everything that I need." But in doing that, we can lose the understanding of the virtue of humility. To say, I am not perfect. It's God who is perfect, God who's directing my growth. And for God to direct my growth, I need to allow him to work in my life. I need to allow him to take charge. I need to be receptive to what he wants to give to me. Today is known as Good Shepherd Sunday. It's also a day to pray for vocations, vocations to the priesthood, to religious life, recognizing we do need those individuals in the church who have been called to perform this ministry, to help others encounter God, to receive the sacraments. Thinking about in our first reading today from the Acts of the Apostles, Peter gives his first homily at Pentecost. And about 3,000 people are converted that day. How many more people would be converted today if we go out and share this gospel, share this good news, not allow it to take second place in our daily lives, but primacy in speaking about our love for God, about how God has graced me in my own life, about how God has helped me. And I want to make sure that I'm not an ungrateful recipient of God's gifts, but to glorify God by sharing those gifts you have received, those blessings, those helps, those aids, that grace. One of the challenges as we face in this situation, especially with COVID-19, in this world where evil is still around us, there is wickedness. People do bad things. And you may even ask the question, why do good people suffer? But when we look in our second reading today from the first letter of St. Peter, he says that if you are patient when you are suffering for doing what is good, this is a grace before God. For to this you have been called, because Christ also suffered for you. When we think about Jesus, he's good. He's not lacking. And he suffered for us. Why do the good suffer? Why did Jesus suffer? That we might have life and have it abundantly. And we may fall into the temptation to complain about our own suffering, our own struggles. But yet, how are we allowing this occasion to bring about growth? That not only I may have life more abundantly, but may help others also have life more abundantly. In this midst of COVID-19, there's this beautiful aspect of solidarity, journeying together through this pandemic, seeking to overcome this situation, seeking to do good things so as to help one another, not just thinking about our own selves, but thinking about the care, the needs of other people. Because Jesus coming to us, dying on the cross for us, seeking that we might have life more abundantly. It's not that he needed life more abundantly. No, Jesus is the way, the truth, and the life. He's seeking that we might have life more abundantly. So he's giving us an example and reminding us to continue to grow, to allow him to shepherd us through these days. So there is a little passiveness aspect to this relationship with God. Because we do have to allow God to be God and not try to take his role. And I know some people are wondering about when we're going to be able to celebrate public Mass or have the public sacraments available to us, or even have things go back to normal. But realize the temptation is not about just going back to normal, because during this time we should have been growing. God has been gracing us. And so how are we now different after this? How are we now better? How are we now going to go about things with greater gratitude, not taking things for granted, do things with greater love and care for our neighbor, not being selfish? And so there are many decisions still to be made. There's not a definitive date given for the public celebration of the Mass by our bishop yet, but Bishop has said he's asked for continued patience as he in his office work through the guidelines and procedures to reopen. So there will be more communication coming in the future. There's many things to try to figure out, and practices and procedures to go about with the sacraments, to care for our fellow neighbor, to not just be selfish, what do I want, but what may help the community of believers. Remembering that we seek to have life and have it abundantly as Jesus gives us those graces, those gifts. And so remember, we are still growing in this time. Do not think that you are perfect as you are now, but to allow God to speak to you this day, to have the humility to say, God, teach me where I am to grow today. Where can I be more attentive to listen to you, to recognize your voice, so that I may respond yes to you. Remember, we're running this race. We're not done running the race. We're still improving. We're still growing. And may we continue to grow until we reach that finish line. May we continue to be better, to love more fervently, more like God, so that when we do cross the finish line, we may rejoice abundantly in the heavenly kingdom with all of God's angels and saints. Amen.